Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middle-Sized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and today I'm talking about rhododendrons, and these are brilliantly beautiful flowers. They're incredibly easy care and they love shade, so they could be a fantastic plant to have in our garden. But there are a few things that we really need to know about them before we actually buy and choose and plant them. So I've come here to Leonardslee Lakes and Gardens in Sussex to talk to head gardener Stephen Herrington about how we should choose and grow rhododendrons in our own gardens. Leonardslee has 240 acres of woodland and parkland with fabulous woodland walks and wonderful spring colour and autumn foliage. And rhododendrons have grown there for hundreds of years. It used to be owned by Edmund Loader, who was a Victorian plant hunter and a rhododendron breeder, and he bred some of these rhododendrons which have been here since his time, which was around 1901. The gardens were recently closed for 10 years and have recently had one of the biggest garden revamps in Britain, possibly even one of the biggest restorations of a garden in Europe. And they're now open to the public, and you can get an annual season ticket, or you can just get a day ticket, which you can buy online. I'll put links to Leonardslee Lakes and Gardens in the description below, along with some individual names of rhododendrons. So, Stephen, what do we need to know when we are thinking about buying a rhododendron for our own much smaller garden?
So you've got to think about the size of your garden, how big your garden is, what you want the rhododendron to achieve, what do you want it to do for you, and what time of year do you want it to flower. So rhododendrons can flower from, you get winter flowering rhododendrons as well. So they flower anywhere between January right up to the end of June, and there is the odd one that's summer flowering. So think about what time of year you want it to flower, how big you want it to grow, do you want it to lose its leaves in the winter, and do you want it to be scented?
So it's really worth checking when your rhododendron is going to flower before buying it, because obviously you're not in your garden much in midwinter or even late winter or even early spring. So you would probably want an early flowering rhododendron to be seen from the house. On the other hand, by summer you might be sitting out in the garden enjoying a cup of tea or working on the border. So then you might enjoy having a later flowering rhododendron somewhere further down the garden. So where do rhododendrons grow best?
So rhododendrons grow best in acidic soil. So that's not lime soil, it's acidic soil, and they like not a really sunny spot, dappled shade or full shade, and they like lots of water, lots and lots of water. If you live in a dry part of the country, then they're not the plant for you.
And when should we plant rhododendrons?
So historically you could always plant them in the spring or the autumn, but we generally go for the autumn nowadays because there seems to be quite a lot of dry springs happening at the moment. So we go for autumn, so they get a good amount of rain throughout the winter. You shouldn't plant them in frosty conditions.
Do rhododendrons grow in shade?
So rhododendrons grow in the shade, but certain varieties will take the sun. So not full sun, but partial sun.
Can rhododendrons be grown in pots?
Yes, they can grow in pots, and a lot of people grow them in pots, and we've had lots of questions about that this year. So as long as it's a good sized pot and it has acidic soil and it's free draining, they'll be absolutely happy in that. They just need feeding throughout the year. You can use an acidic kind of feed that you can buy for those plants. They grow quite big, some of them. You can get quite compact ones as well, but leave a good 15 centimetres around the side of the plant for it to grow into in the pot. You put it in a good sized pot to start off with, that 15 centimetres, it will last in that pot for about 2 to 3 years, and then you can repot it. We wouldn't do root pruning on them. You just repot into a bigger pot. Can
rhododendrons be grown as houseplants in pots?
Yes, they can. There's a section of rhododendrons called the Virea rhododendrons or the Madeni rhododendrons, which are from temperate regions across the world, and they have an amazing scent to them, and they'll grow indoors. So if you wanted to grow one of those particular ones, grow them inside in a cool conservatory, but the rest of them are better outside.
What plants go well with rhododendrons?
So rhododendrons, what we normally do is we think about where they grow in their natural environment, so across China, India, Himalayas. So it's thinking about what plants naturally grow with them there in their natural habitat, and we kind of try and mimic that here. So here we have lots of primulas and foxgloves and lots of other conifers and magnolias growing with them, and that gives kind of a natural kind of effect. But you can use rhododendrons pretty much anyway. You can use them in a herbaceous border as one of kind of your focal shrubs. So they'll take up that good shady spot in a herbaceous border. And some of the smaller ones, the azalea types, you can keep them quite trimmed as well after flowering. So they'll fit nicely in a herbaceous border.
Can rhododendrons be moved?
Yes, they can do. And we've had to move quite a few over the time of the restoration here. Again, as long as you do it in the autumn, give them a really good water before you start. Check which rhododendron it is. If it's one that can be cut down, then do cut it down a bit. And then, either use a spade. We've used diggers quite a lot, but you can use a spade. Make sure you get lots of soil of them, lift them, and then move them. Give them lots of good organic matter and acidic compost, and then make sure they're kept watered for a couple of years afterwards.
Can rhododendrons be cut back hard?
It depends on which one you have. So some can be cut hard back. Others won't take to be cut back at all, and they'll die. So a lot of the azalea types, we wouldn't cut them hard back, but after flowering, so in July, we give them a trim round to keep them compact. We cut off that new growth, but obviously after they've flowered, we don't want to cut off the flowers. A general rule is, if you see new growth coming from the bottom of the plant, if you've got a big woody old rhododendron, have a look down in the middle, and if you see lots of new growth coming, you can normally cut them back to a kind of a node on the stem or the trunk. But what I would say was just check before you do anything, read up about it.
And how should we prune rhododendrons?
So again, it depends on the type, but as I said with the azalea types, we use secateurs or even use a hedge cutter on them. Again, after flowering, so in July, we'll just trim them into the shapes we need to keep them back off paths, and in our historic rock garden to give other things, give room to them. Some we take a chainsaw to. If they're really big old ones, we'll take a chainsaw to them and they'll re-come again. There's one in here in the garden called Rhododendron luteum, which is kind of semi-naturalized across the garden, has lovely yellow flowers that are scented. Now what we tend to do is we cut clumps down to the ground every 5 years and they'll come back up again. It just depends on what type you've got and what you use.
Is there anything else we need to know about caring for rhododendrons in our gardens?
They're fairly easy, really. They get on with things, but what they need is in really dry spells, if they're newly planted, they've got to be kept watered. So watering is probably a key. So where they grow in their natural habitat, they grow in lots of valleys and areas with lots of rain. So they're kept moist, and they grow best when they're moist. And again, if you grow them in a small spot, just make sure you feed them as well. But other than that, they're fairly easy plants to look after.
Can you take cuttings from rhododendrons?
Yes, and we do take cuttings from our rhododendrons. We normally take some of the new growth and we put them under mist benches. If you don't have mist, then a nice free draining compost and pop them in. We use a bark compost is better. That's what they naturally grow in. And you can put a plastic bag over them and just keep them sprayed over to make sure they root in. But quite a lot of them have to be grafted as well.
So what would cause a rhododendron to die in my garden?
So there's a few things. Not being watered is quite a big cause. There's a disease called Phytophthora, which affects rhododendrons, which can kill them. And then old age as well. Some of the ones we got in the garden here are 150 years old, and sometimes they'll topple over or parts of them die out. So that's why we have to keep propagating them.
And why isn't my rhododendron flowering?
So that could be a number of reasons. It's not quite old enough to flower yet. So some rhododendrons don't flower till they're a certain age. So it might be too young. It's not enjoying itself. It's not being kept watered enough, or not being fed. That's one thing. Or you've maybe pruned it at the wrong time of the year. So you might have cut all the flowers off. So we always prune after flowering rhododendrons. But if you're having trouble getting your rhododendron to flower, you could always give it some potash, and that will push it to flower.
Are rhododendrons poisonous to dogs or cats or sheep?
They're not, no, and they wouldn't generally go eating them, so they wouldn't affect them.
And what about rhododendrons and wildlife, particularly bees?
Certain ones, the nectar is actually poisonous, can be poisonous, so they wouldn't go for those. But we have beehives in the garden, and they do go to the rhododendrons. They know which ones to choose and which ones has the poisonous. Quite a lot of information out there about the rhododendrons, which ones to choose. I'd say more the deciduous types would be better for bees.
I've heard that rhododendrons are invasive. Is there any rhododendron that I shouldn't buy or shouldn't plant in my garden?
So Rhododendron ponticum, which is the invasive type, was brought over by the Victorians, and it was planted on big estates as a cover for pheasant and grouse shooting. And then it's just got out of control and it's spread everywhere. So that one's really important not to grow that. And then some of the hybrids from that can be quite invasive as well. We have areas here which we're having to remove it, and we cut it down and then dig it out, and we have to burn it all because it does poison the soil around it, so nothing else grows.
If you're interested in tips from head gardeners for your own garden, then do check out the playlist at the end of this video, which is called Interviews from Experts. And if you'd like more tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden, then do subscribe to the Middle Sized Garden YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.